pick up with the class next week, and I think there's going to be 2 more weeks in the course, and so he'll finish this out in Colossians. But one of the things we've been talking about throughout this study so far is kind of like how to live this new life. A lot has been said throughout Colossians about putting to death the old person and coming to life with this new type of a person. And so what we've been doing is we've been describing what that looks like. And we saw in the beginning part of chapter 3 that there's some sins that we don't want to participate in. And then we saw last week that there's a bunch of stuff we want to do. And above everything, he says in verse 14, we want to put on love, which holds everything together. And I think that's going to be important to remember that phrase that love is what kind of binds everything or holds everything together. It's kind of the glue that makes everything work, okay? But before we get to that, let's go ahead and have a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for the blessings that you shower upon us. We're thankful for this time that we can study and pray that our study is good for us and helpful to us as we strive to walk in a way that pleases you and glorifies you. We love you, and so your Son that we pray. Amen. So as we think about like the types of people that Paul is wanting us to be and the types of people that he's wanting to produce in us, one of the major things that we need to talk about is like who we are at home, okay? And so what happens in this next section, and if you study Ephesians does the same thing. Now, actually, a lot of New Testament writing does. It describes basically 3 relationships that take place in the home. Sometimes in Bible studies, they call this the household code, right? So like, this is very strange for us to talk about in some of these ways because these things don't really make up and consist of what our homes are. But when you think about the culture they lived in the home, there were 3 basic relationships. A man would have his wife, he would often have his children, and then very often his servants, right, or his slaves. And so that's what the home consisted of. And so what is being taught is those 3 relationships: husband and wife relationship, child and parent relationship, and then the servant master relationship. Okay, and so what we'll do, and Ephesians goes into much more detail about these. There's much larger sections that Ephesians talks about. But if you look at this section, one of the things you'll notice is that it's rather short, and it's also not necessarily balanced. And so, let me put it up, right? So verse 18 and 19 talks about the wives of the husbands. Verse 20 and 21 talk about children and fathers. Then 22 is bondservants, and then chapter 4, verse 1 is masters. And so there seems to be like a lopsidedness to it, right? Wives get 1 sentence. Or husbands, 1 sentence. Children, 1 sentence. Fathers, 1 sentence. Masters, 1 sentence. Bondservants or slaves, they get like a paragraph, right? So there's a balance there, which tells you, I think, probably there's a reason that's done. That maybe this is like the bigger issue that he's dealing with there. I don't know if you guys know this, but they actually have a fairly famous master-slave relationship. And read the New Testament, the book of Philemon is about a slave. Philemon is a slave master, and he has a servant named Onesimus who ran away, and like there's this little like 1-chapter book of the Bible about it. Well, they are members of the Church of Colossae, and we actually learn that later on in Colossians, where we learn Onesimus is one of their members. Anyway, so there might have been like some tension between those relationships, and so that's why he talks a little bit more about that. Anyway, what probably is I think verse 20 and 21 for us are like easy peasy, right? We all get it, right? Children obey parents, and fathers don't provoke your children to wrath lest they become discouraged. We get it. When we talk about the husband-wife relationship, there's a tension in what is said there and what is often practiced in our culture, at least the way this is perceived, I think. And then there's certainly an unease with talking about in the home, in the master and having a slave, right? That there's some unease there. And so we're just going to briefly talk about these things and then hopefully open it up to some conversation. One relationship at a time. Wives and husbands. Wives are told this: submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and do not be harsh with them. Okay, so the way I like to explain this, the way I understand it, a couple things about that word submit that are important. First of all, there's a difference between the word submit in verse 21 and the word obey in verse 20. He tells children, obey your parents. It's like end of sentence, no discussion. You do what your parents tell you to do. All right? He's not saying the same thing to the wives. I think sometimes it's treated that way, but that's not what he's saying. Okay, there's a difference. Secondly, and this is a grammatical point, so bear with me. In the Greek language, they have that can be active, which basically means subject of the sentence is doing the action. They have passive verbs, which means subject of the sentence is having the action done to them. And then they have what they call middle verbs, which is where this isn't 100, basically where the subject does the action to themselves. So active, I do it. Passive, it's done to me. Middle, I do it to myself. Okay, so he very purposefully puts this middle voice. All right, that this is what the wife does to herself. The husband is not told, make your wife submit, or submit your wife, or anything along those lines. It is something the wife is to do to herself. Also, there's interesting in the terminology between submission, and then he says in verse 19, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. So submit and love. Now that's interesting, because wouldn't we also think that the wife is to love her husband? Yeah, I mean, that when you say one, you're not necessarily excluding the other. There's an emphasis on the totality, right? So when I'm told to love Alicia, that in no way suggests that Alicia isn't also supposed to, in some sense, love me. There's a difference in the relationship. There's an emphasis that is being given, but I don't think there's a totality of what is being given. In the same type of a way, the wife is told to submit to her husband, which basically means lower yourself, lower yourself in importance to your husband. But I don't think it's safe to say that the husband needs to not think in a similar type of a way, right? I don't think that there's any relationship, whether it be with my wife, whether it be with my children, whether it be with, anybody that might be in my home or anybody else where I'm supposed to think I'm more important. There's a sense in which I'm supposed to submit to everybody. Ephesians chapter 5 actually explains that, I think, in a little clearer detail, where it says, everyone be submissive to one another. So it's true that there's an emphasis to what they're saying. So I'll tell you how I see it, kind of through a word picture. Let me say this first. I was having a conversation with my kids last night. We're crazy thinking about colleges for Emma. We're talking about going to college, that stuff. It's hard to imagine, but it's not too far away, right? It's halfway through her junior year, and we're talking about visiting schools and all those different types of things. And we're talking about dorms and living in colleges and different places. And one of the things I talked to her, I'm it's just a reality in life. There's going to be very few people you want to live with always. When I went to college, when I first went to college, I roomed with a guy, and it lasted about a week, and then he asked to go somewhere else. And it was primarily because he was a senior and I was a freshman, and he's why'd they pair me with a friend? He didn't know me, so he asked for another room, and I was fine. And then they gave me a roommate, and I enjoyed, I guess, that semester with that roommate, but then he stopped school and he went away, and I actually had a dorm to myself for a couple of months. I'm this is cool. I enjoyed a little dorm to myself, and then I transferred schools. I didn't hit a transfer portal or anything like that. It was just I just transferred. And so I transferred schools, and I went to another school, and they paired me with the roommate. And I'm telling you guys, I try to love everyone. He was hard. He was not my favorite person to live with, right? And then I actually moved into a house with some of my best friends. There were 5 of us, and we lived in a house together. I tell you what, to this day, some of those guys are my very best friends. I loved them. They were My oldest friends, my best friends, love them to death. I'm telling you, living with them at times is hard. It's just like, it's hard to live with people. There's a way I like to do things. There's a way you like to do things. And we just, I was telling my kids last night, there's going to come a time, if it's not already there, there's going to come a time where you think, I don't really want to live with Dad anymore. I love them. I appreciate the upbringing, but I don't really want to live in this house. I love my parents. I don't want to live with them, right? We get that. And I didn't say this last night. It's probably going to come a time where I don't want them to live in my house either, right? It's just a basic reality of life that most people we don't want to live with always. But there's one person that as long as I'm alive, as long as she's alive, we will live together. We got to figure out how to do this, right? And we got to figure out how to do this at peace, in harmony, and not at odds with each other. And so here's the instruction. Wives, submit. That is, lower yourself. There's going to be times where you don't want to do something, but you have to say, you know what? We're going to do it your way. I'm just going to lower myself. And the husband's not told to say, all right, cool, go make me a sandwich. What the husband is told is, now you love your wives. And so, if you know what loving is, that's elevation. You're thinking of other people ahead of yourself. So the word picture I see is a woman lowering herself while the husband's picking her up above him. To where it's both ways. One is said submission, one is love. Both people value the other more than themselves. And so I'm not waiting for I'm not saying well, my wife's got to take care of all this and put everything. No, that's not fair. And at the same time, she's not doing that to me. We are both valuing the other more than ourselves. And that is how can work. Okay? And so that's the way I view this. To me, the idea of submission has such a negative connotation, but the reality is this. If you're going to try to live in a house with somebody and you always get your way, you ain't going to be real happy in that house. And it goes both ways. That there has to be a lowering of self or an elevation of another. And that's kind of what happens here. She's lowering her and you're elevating her. To where I always get my way. And to me, this sometimes is a real negative vibe it gets. I don't think it should be. Okay, next relationship. This one we won't spend much time on. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, provoke your children to wrath, lest they become discouraged. And so he gives stronger language to the children. He doesn't just say children, he says children obey. You might say somewhat into discussion, I told you to do it. Was it some people say, people use different types of things, I don't know, I feel it's slipping my mind right now. Cosby used to say something along these lines, Bill Cosby, or he says something in one of those shows, or whatever. Anyway, do what I tell you to do, basically, right? What's that? That's what it is. I brought you into this world, I can take you out, type of thing, right? It's basic. You do what I tell you to do. But here's the caveat to that. If you live with that attitude, you're going to provoke a type of anger within your child. Children can grow up to be bitter, be discouraged, and reject their parents. And so while it's crucially important that children learn to obey their parents, it can literally save their lives, right? They have to obey. It's also crucially important that parents treat their children that won't provoke them, that won't cause attention. You can, on the one hand, expect obedience out of your children, and at the same time, treat them with love and respect and dignity as human beings to where I could say something like, I don't care what your opinion, you just do what it won't go well. It won't. And that has been tried time and time again. And so, yes, they must obey you. That is true. It is good for them to obey you. But fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, lest they become discouraged. I will say this. This is also interesting. There seems to be, and I always I don't know why. I kind of think I know why. But he switches. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. And I don't know, but maybe dads, we have a tendency of being more of the provokers than my home. There's a sharpness I can speak with sometimes that I need to tone down a little. I don't know that that's why, but there is some reason why he switches from parents to fathers. And then verse 22 through chapter 4, verse 1. Again, this is the longest section. And so we're not going to be able to talk about everything. But again, he uses the obey, right? So bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters. Not by way of eye service as men or people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance of as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done. And so it's basically, again, obey your masters. And that, I think the two previous ones often make sense to us. It makes sense that within a home, there's going to be this mutual respect, right? Going to work well. That there's going to be a submission and an elevation, right? That there's going to be submission and there's going to be love. It makes sense to us that children should obey their parents. What doesn't make sense often to us, what we feel unease with, is that someone would be the slave of another. And we would want God to say that, no, that can't happen. That should not happen. But instead, he tells them to obey. And so there's this tension that arises. And I think they appreciated it. But we today, it's almost hard to talk about. We really appreciate it. Seems to be something wrong with this. And yet what he tells them is, don't do this thinking about that guy, master. Appreciate the fact that ultimately you serve the Lord, and he's going to be your judge, and he's going to be the one who makes what's right and wrong. And then he tells masters this: treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you have a master in heaven. And so it's very often for masters to act as complete lords and rulers over their servants. And he says, okay, think about, it's kind of like we're told to forgive as the Lord forgives, and various things along those lines. Well, if these people are going to be under you, God's paying attention to how you are towards them, because you also have a master who's over you. So if you want God to be harsh with you, then be harsh with them, type of a thing. I'll say this, and this is my thought about bondservants to discuss. I think the way God handles is interesting, because on the one hand, we feel like God should just come out and say, no slaves. And he doesn't do that. I think what we learn is something about God and the way he handles things. Is that God, and you might say, as we look at the Christian world around us, what God did worked, right? There's not a lot of slavery in Christian societies anymore. And it's because while God doesn't say no slaves, he does say, love your neighbor. And when I hear love my neighbor, what that tells me is don't capture them. When I hear love my neighbor, what that does tell me is don't make them my slave. And so what he does is he doesn't address And probably there's some societal reasons, cultural reasons for this. He doesn't address that specific sin, he gets to the heart of it. If God can produce in his followers people who loved their neighbors, people who treated everyone with justice, people who treated everyone with fairness, then while he never said don't have slaves, he essentially said don't have slaves. And what's happened is when people come to justice, fairness, and all these things, societies that follow that, slavery kind of dissipates. And so that's my understanding of these sections. Any questions or comments y'all have before we get into some of the questions that I've come up with?
I had heard a sermon one time where we talked about in verse 23 that actually apply to employees and employers. That like when you go to work, obviously your employer is asking you, but you should still be working and
Yeah.
you're working for the Lord.
Yeah. No, I think that's the typical application we try to make of it. It's very clearly two different situations, but I think what we're learning is a principle, right? Whether it be husbands and wives, whether it be fathers with their children, whether it be masters with their servants, there is a way the world operates that is those who are stronger, those who are bigger, and those who have power tend to mistreat those who they can mistreat. And God's way of doing things flips that on its head to where husbands are taught, yeah, it's true. In most cases, you're going to be stronger and more powerful than your wife. And men have mistreated women for thousands of years because of it. But those who follow Christ don't do that. And parents have misused their children for thousands of years and been harsh to their children for thousands of years because they're bigger and stronger and they can. But following Christ negates that from happening. In the same type of a way, masters and slaves. So while it's different, I think you could take the same principle and apply it to the workforce. That you might be the employer and this might be the employee. You're in charge, you can do things. But God's way of doing things forbids people in power, people who are stronger, people who have the ability to mistreat people just because they can or for their own benefit. God's way of doing things is quite different than that. So while it's a different situation, I do think you can find an application in like the workforce. Good question. Anything else? Okay, so first question. What are some of the commonalities that link the three relationships? And what does this tell us about our various relationships? What's that?
Do you have a slide with the question?
I don't know. Maybe I should have written that up there. I wanted you to all see the verse when I asked it. But I'll read it again. What are some of the things that are common between all three of the relationships? And how can we apply that to our relationships?
Well, there's always somebody that's in charge.
Yeah.
There's always somebody that's going to be the one that's getting the...
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. Like, this is clearly about that, right? There are people, he is the order of it. So he addresses first the people who usually are mistreated, and he tells them how to handle their situations when they're usually mistreated. And then he talks to the people who usually are in charge, and he tells them this is how you handle that. So there's always, whether in the home, whether at the workplace, just in life, you're always going to have, for lack of a better term, the haves and the have-nots, right? You're going to have those in charge and those who are have those others in charge of them. And so there's that commonality of all three of these types of relationships that he's addressing.
I think there's something in common with one word that would describe every side, and that's respect.
Yeah.
Because you have to
No, I think that's great. Yeah, that look, life in large part is about relationships. And if you have good relationships, that produces better things in life than if you have bad relationships. If I have a bad relationship with my wife, there's a phrase, happy wife, happy life, which there's truth to that, but it's also true the other way around too, right? I mean, it's just a general truth that if I'm mad at my wife or my wife's mad at me or whatever, I mistreat her, she mistreats me, it's going to make the home just a place that's not good for us. It's not going to be good for our kids. It's not going to be good ultimately for societies and all these different things, right? So like the thing that we use the word respect, that have a respect for the people in your life. Treat them in ways that they should be treated. Happy spouse, happy house. There we go. I like that one too. That one works also. You be right. There's a reason there's all these sayings. It's because there's truth to them, right? There's a reality of that. Oh.
I think compromise or give is something that goes along with all three of these.
Yeah. Not insist. It's interesting. And I said this about Ephesians. I've said it many times. Colossians and Ephesians are very similar. Ephesians, the sentence right before this whole section of husbands, wives, is a sentence that says, it's talking about like spirituality and a spiritual person is submitting to one another out of reverence for the Lord. And so in every relationship, there is not an insistence on my own way. It's just spiritual people don't insist on having things their way. Spiritual people there's a give and a take to it, right? Spiritual people have a respect for one another. Spiritual people don't insist on you always doing what I want. That doesn't matter if I'm your parent, if I'm your spouse, or if we work together, or if not real applicable today, like I'm your master, right? But like there's just a way in which humans ought to behave. And always me, I get what I want.
I was going to say, going along with that, I feel like a common thing you see here is emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think emotions can make us cross the line at times. One of the things I say to the boys all the time is, you're allowed to be mad at me. You're not allowed to be disrespectful because of that.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes the same way with every relationship. I mean, I should be like that with Chuck, he should be like that with me, with our kids, with our parents, all the things. I do think when you tie emotion to it, then it allows there to be a line that can be crossed, and just make sure that
Right. Yeah, I think, and look, it's interesting why all this stuff comes after, what we talked about the previous weeks, things like anger and slander and all those different things, rather like kindness and forgiveness. I think if we take those types of things that we are to be, he says the things that we're to put off, the things that we're to put on, and we insert those into our relationships, like we'll find that our relationships are much better. Like emotions they're to be controlled. And like it's not wrong to be angry. It is wrong to be angry, towards someone. Like you have to control types of things to learn kindness and fairness and all of these different things. And you're right that the problems we have, the reason parents often provoke their children is because their children provoke them first, right? It's just like the kid did something they're not supposed to do, and I get angry about it, and I act in a certain type of a way. And so I think you're right, emotion. So I think there's no bell. Our time is up, and so I appreciate y'all's thoughts and comments. We'll go ahead and put a pin in it and pick up next week. My dad will actually teach. Sorry, next week. That's the prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for the blessings you shower upon us. We're thankful for this time where we could be together. We're thankful for this study, and we pray that it's good and helpful to us. We pray that we will be people in our homes, whether to our spouses or our children or to whoever we are with in life, that we will be people who don't insist on our way, that we are people who are fair and respectful, people who are willing to yield in various situations, that we act with love and kindness and goodness towards all the people in our lives. And We ask that that would foster good and helpful relationships. Our God, we love you, and it's through your